This, of course, is the easiest boss in the game. The Soulsborne series is home to some of gaming's most unique and bold artifacts. Even if you've never played any of these games, you know about them. The term Dark Souls has become a colloquialism that just means, oh yeah, this game is slightly more difficult than usual. From Software has solidified itself as one of the few studios that actually manages to put out a quality game every single time. These psycho bastards have not missed once, at least from what I heard. I must confess that before Elden Ring, I hadn't played a single Souls game, which appears to be the case for a lot of people. I've always wanted to, but I figured that, knowing myself, they would just make me very angry and want to destroy my property in a fit of rage. And it turns out I was correct, but it's still a pretty good game, I guess. Turns out, and this is going to be a big surprise, so buckle up that seatbelt. Turns out, Elden Ring is a difficult video game. I haven't played a game this intense since I beat Doom Eternal on Nightmare difficulty. This is not a baby game like Call of Duty or The Witcher 3. This is a real men's game where goats roll around like Sonic the Hedgehog. Look at him go! I've seen some claims that this is the most accessible Souls game, but I've also heard that it's the hardest one yet. Without having that frame of reference though, the best way I can describe the difficulty is by saying that it's almost as hard as the pachinko level in Mario Sunshine. The bosses in this game are just fuckers, dude. I mean it. You got dragons, bears, fat guys, invisible that can just command grab you and stab you. They can do this and that and this and that and it's like this and like that and like this and it's like a fighting game, except every second or third enemy and boss is the stupid final boss that has a full screen command grab with 2 frames of startup that can launch into a 14-hit combo. But much like a fighting game, you do have options. There's sorcery, there's the fat roll, summons, common azure, the hoarfrost stomp, which I am convinced was put in here just so you can fight these invisible bastards. There are so many mechanics and funky attacks in this game that even if I did find them all, I probably couldn't sum it up in one video. You have to study the boss's attack patterns so you can wait for an opening, but just when you figured out how to get around one attack, he fucking busts out another one you never seen before and knocks your tits off in the next January, and then enemies that were once horrifying bosses eventually just become regular ass enemies. It's like playing a game of chess with an 8-year-old where he gets to use G.I. Joes to just drop kick your pieces because of course he does, and then when you learn how to cheat back, FromSoft patches it out and then you have a stroke. But the fun part is rising above that little bastard and beating him anyway. Actually, it's more like Doom Eternal if every enemy was the Marauder. One tiny mistake can just end you, even if you're a high level and have all the best armor and have been playing like a G up until that point. Yes, Elden Ring is a bastard game, but at the same time it's very rewarding. And that's the coolest thing about the combat, because even if you're fighting a basic bitch enemy, it's never boring because they can pull all types of crap and you just gotta figure it out and outmaneuver them. Even in the back half of the game, you don't have the agency to waltz around the lesser enemies without a care in the world. You can still get killed by a raggedy ass dog if you're not paying attention. It's weird and frustrating if you're not ready, but eventually, it all clicks. It is worth noting I didn't start speccing into Vigor until I was like level 130, which is a very big mistake that you should never make. It's also worth noting that I was basically fat rolling for the entire game. Why was I fat rolling, you ask? Well, because this fat guy armor is really funny. Look at him. Look at him. Look at him! I think what makes this game click for me is the fact that it is completely free of tedium and time wasting for its massive duration. I've played a lot of games where in between the short burst of gameplay there were like 10 minutes of boring dialogue trees that forced me to drink just to be able to sit through it all, or even worse, I've also played games that are designed so that if you make one small mistake, you have to repeat huge chunks of trivial bullshit just to get back to the part that's actually difficult. Now, depending who you ask, that kind of stuff might just add to the intensity, but if you ask me though, I feel like forcing me to wade through 10 minutes of trivial garbage just to get back to the part that's actually giving me issues is, Well, it's maidenless behavior. Elden Ring is usually sure to put a site of grace or a stake of Marika very close to whatever rat bastard boss fight they have planned for you, so you don't have to trudge through a bunch of menial crap just to give it another shake. It's one of the things that people have pointed to as a positive feature of the game, and one of the things that makes it more accessible without sacrificing any of the actual challenge. Enemies and items do respawn infinitely when you hit a site of grace, so yes, there is nothing stopping you from grinding indefinitely until all your stats are at some absurd level. Grinding is helpful in Elden Ring, but you can't just bring everything up to level 99 and expect the game to just roll over for you. Well, maybe you can, but it would take 3 weeks, so it's not exactly efficient. The differences between levels are often marginal, but the sick truth is that because the game is so hard, you never know when those razor-thin margins could end up being the difference between beating the boss or getting slapped in the face when he has 3 health left. Enemies are vicious enough that they can't be invalidated by numbers alone. You still have to know what you're doing so you can understand what do the enemies do, how do they attack, what are their patterns, how do I get around them, what the fuck is this bullshit? One of the things that I love is that the class you choose at the beginning is little more than just a set of base level stats you are given, meaning that if you start out as one class but realize maybe it wasn't the best choice, you can just spec into the playstyle you're really keen on and build the tarnish that you want. Heavy attacks, magic, stealth, spamming throwing daggers like a bitch, summoning spirits, ghost dogs, way of the samurai. Elden Ring gives you a lot to work with and is built to accommodate a lot of playstyles, but the one thing it doesn't allow is dumbass playstyle. I think in my case, I mostly played it by ear, juggling swordplay and throwing projectiles while abusing the AI wherever possible. That is, until I started using sorcery. A lot of the bosses do kind of pigeonhole you into playing a very specific way, but the game is a lot more open to experimentation and cleverness when you're in the open world. I remember I was fighting Commander Oni plays and I was harassing him with projectiles, then I lured him out of the little fighting area into the exploding Scarlet Rot Lake and did a shitload of damage to him that way. That alone probably won me the fight. There was this big guy with a spear and I didn't feel like fighting him head on, so I tricked him into waltzing off a cliff, forcing him to climb up the ladder, and I shot projectiles at him that he couldn't defend against. Black Blade Kindred, I hadn't upgraded my health for shit, so this guy just kills me in one hit, so great, fantastic. That's when I just sling boulders at him and then run inside the church and wait for him to stop attacking me and rest, and then I go out and do it again until he dies. Sure, it took me 24 minutes, but it would have taken me 3 hours to learn his attack patterns to be able to dodge every single one-shot or upgrade my health so it wouldn't be a one-shot, so really, I'm just being efficient. Now these kinds of tactics may be underhanded or cheesy or dishonorable, but half of the fun in true open world games has always been using the non-linear structure of the world to your advantage, at least I think. On the other hand, I think Elden Ring is a very replayable game by its nature, so maybe, you know, on your second or third playthroughs you can get good and not just pelt throwing daggers at everyone or abuse sorcery. Either way, you do still have to know what you're doing if you want to win, and the hardest thing about Elden Ring is being patient and restrained. It is very easy to get complacent in this game when things are going good, but it's that complacency that can allow things to go very wrong very quickly. There are parts of this game that I am convinced were put in there because somebody on the dev team was going through their Joker phase, but when all the planets align and you just wreck it anyway, that's a different kind of satisfaction than you will ever experience in any other video game. You see, this boss, this guy almost made me quit the game entirely, but 78 tries and 1 broken coffee mug later, I finally beat him. And my entire body was shaking. I almost collapsed to the floor. This game is fucking crazy. Elden Ring is an open world game, which seemed like a questionable decision when it was first revealed, but as you may have gathered, this is one of those good open world games where the non-linearity actually services the gameplay instead of being a railroaded Rockstar experience. This is one of those open world games where every part of the map is actually useful, which is frustratingly rare for open world games. Everything the light touches can be explored and honestly should be. There's no quest log or automatic waypoints and whatnot. Some areas in particular are a bastard for navigation because of how layered and dense they are. Much like the combat, it's intimidating if you're not used to it, but at the same time, it's a lot more rewarding than many of its contemporaries, and this is probably one of the better open world games because of all that. Elden Ring is a communal experience in a way, where you'll watch another person play and they'll discover a cave or something that you missed, and so you go, thanks for the tip, wise guy, and you discreetly take pictures of the screen with your phone so you can go there next time you play it yourself. I had the same experience with Breath of the Wild, and yes, that is a very good thing. And you might be saying, but Bino, my cousin, not every open world game has to be Breath of the Wild. To which I say, yeah, you're wrong. Exploration in this game is very engaging, but also extremely dangerous. Big ass fucker enemies are hiding around every other corner. I went to the hell area and a fucking ginormous dragon that was just bigger than every other enemy in the game combined was just sitting there, and I was walking on eggshells to avoid waking him up. I was walking down this hill and a giant boulder rolled down out of nowhere and crushed me. Even since writing this part of the script, so much stuff happened that I couldn't recount it all if I tried. This is such a huge game that I couldn't even spoil the entire thing in a single 20-minute video if I wanted to. Whenever a Souls game comes out, there's a lot of discourse about, okay, should this game have an easy mode? Yes, but Elden Ring's solution is way more interesting. You slowly unlock the easy mode by exploring the world until you find a bunch of cool items or weapons or spells that make it way easier. Or a warp to the edge of the earth with a bunch of enemies that give you 1,000 runes each. The world is full of secrets that reward a curious player with material improvements to their Tarnished. There aren't any waypoints or quest logs, but the directions you get from NPCs are rarely so nebulous that you won't understand what to do, and the result is an entirely player-directed adventure. Sure, some things were a tiny bit cryptic. I'm not sure how I was supposed to know that a giant hole to an entire area would appear in literally Where Am I, South Limgrave after killing General Radahn, who lives in East Caelid on the other side of the goddamn map. I mean, maybe I was told and just zoned out because I'm an idiot, or perhaps that's just part of the game's appeal. I think that, possibly even more so than Breath of the Wild did 5 years ago, Elden Ring perfectly recaptures the feeling you get playing the original Legend of Zelda on NES with all its mysteries without any information being told to you at all. There are useful collectibles for those that go off the beaten path and platforming puzzles for the brave. And then it hit me. Elden Ring is the M-rated version of Banjo-Kazooie. There were so many moments in this game where I was looking for a certain thing or trying to grind for crafting materials and then stumbled upon an entire mini dungeon that I had no idea was there, and that's incredible. That feeling that your curiosity will always be rewarded, it just engulfed my entire attention span. Not to mention you have a really fucking cool horse that can double jump and jank its way up mountains like Skyrim. New Age games, especially RPGs, love to hide a ton of really cool and nuanced game mechanics under billions of menus for items, weapons, armor, equipment, spells, all with 5 or 6 slots that you can upgrade them with and then apply to some hotkey, and they all rely on each other to function optimally, and you can only access this through this menu or pressing Y while in this menu, and each weapon has its own slot for this special rock you found a billion years ago that you forgot even existed, and you can buff it with these ashes, but only if you talk to this guy and have this exact crafting item and spec most of your levels into this stat, and if you missed or somehow forgot what the tutorial said, you gotta Google it in shame. Now this is a very personal and subjective complaint, and Elden Ring is absolutely not the worst offender in this regard, and as I went on, I was pleasantly surprised by how uncomplicated the game's many systems ended up being in the end. This is not going to be a problem for anyone who plays these types of games regularly, but this stuff usually bugs me, so it's worth noting. The difference is, when I'm playing something like The Witcher 3, this shit doesn't matter to me at all because you can just spam light attack while dodging, making the other mechanics superfluous in the end, even on the harder difficulties. But in Elden Ring, because the game is such a bastard, these mechanics are often very helpful in the end, and learning them can be crucial to success. It is worth noting that this PC version is supposedly not very well optimized. For a little reference, the minimum requirements for Elden Ring are roughly the same as the recommended requirements for Cyberpunk, which was already a very poorly optimized game. I don't have an elite gaming PC by 2022 standards, but most of the components in my system do meet the recommended requirements as per the Steam page, so I probably got off pretty light. The frame rate was mostly solid, but stuttering and graphical bugs persisted throughout my playthrough, and I think it crashed on me 20 times. Yeah, I counted. You might say my computer is getting old, but not even Cyberpunk fucked up this much. This is not a bad looking game at all, but are there enough polygons and anti-aliased, ray-traced, refractive occlusion octodelinear texture filters to warrant that kind of horsepower? Yeah, I don't know about that. The graphical glitches typically weren't horribly distracting or game-breaking, except when they were. One time the entire screen just went black and started flashing in and out, and I had to blindly stumble back to the nearest site of grace so I could rest and reboot the game, which didn't work. I was able to mitigate this by turning the effects quality down, but that didn't stop a lot of the other visual bugs from happening. Now, I don't expect any developer, even one as revered as FromSoft, to make something completely free of bugs and glitches, and to be as clear as possible, the game is definitely not unplayable. But I think it's reasonable to expect the screen not to turn black because I had the graphics on high. A lot of people are or will be playing this on PC, so this is kind of a big deal. For a game this prestigious, I really do think more should have been done to make it run better. They have already released a few patches, granted most of them are just nerfing cheese strategies like that one that could have prevented me from having a stroke while fighting the fire giant, but it's not too late for them to fix these other issues in the long run, but for now you might see some weirdo shit. Some people have suggested that the heavy system requirements are to cut down on load times, and I gotta say, if that's true, it really does show. This game has some of the shortest, sweetest load times I have ever seen in an open world game, compared again to The Witcher 3, where I beat the game a year and a half ago and it's still loading the credits. Elden Ring is very efficient by comparison. Crappy optimization and graphical bugs aside, Elden Ring is an absolutely beautiful game. Every frame is like a goddamn Renaissance painting. These are not Red Dead 2, Last of Us 2 levels of realism, but it's possibly the best recent demonstration of how you don't need hyper-realistic visuals when you have excellent art direction. It's a lesson that is more important and relevant now than ever. We are getting so close to photorealism that it's not even special anymore, which is why stylized visuals are so precious now. This downtrodden world between worlds is phenomenally immersive when the shadows aren't flickering and trying to give me a seizure. The golden air trees are always standing somewhere in the background, a ray of light in this horrible, threatening world. Wide open environments with tall, thick grass, derelict ruins, decrepit castles, Doom Eternal area. The fantasy setting is nailed with an absolutely immaculate attention to detail. This is a fully uncompromising universe that I found myself lost in for hours. The story is there, but it's more of a backdrop to the rest of the game. If you heard that George R.R. Martin was involved and expected a Game of Thrones level story, this is not that, but to me that isn't a big deal. There is dialogue and exposition, but it is very much a show and don't tell sort of thing, where the world itself has a rich and storied history made overwhelmingly evident through its details. But what really completes it are the remains of the other players who have both succeeded and failed to overcome whatever you're about to attempt to do. There are messages left behind by other players which serve very little purpose aside from trolling each other. It's a dickhead thing in practice, but at the end of the day, it's funny. And I think that's one of my favorite things about Elden Ring, because it's very, very serious canonically, but at the same time, everything surrounding it is so goofy and ridiculous, and the community just leans into that. This is definitely not a perfect game. For some reason, they borrowed the targeting system from Grand Theft Auto 3, and the camera is a flaccid penis, and it seems as though whenever somebody discovers a winning strategy to fight one of the bosses, FromSoft nerfs every single tool associated with that strategy. I wonder how they decide what to nerf and what not to. Are they just gonna remove your iframes one day? So yeah, Elden Ring is a rat bastard and a son of a bitch and a piece of shit garbage and a fucker and a bag of piss. But it's also one of the most exciting and beautiful games I have played in a very long time. It's a game that has enough respect for its players to experiment and get creative, even if it means letting them be an asshole, but it also has enough disrespect for its players to do this. Its massive success is proof that we as a community can handle more challenging games, and I sincerely hope it triggers a domino effect that will influence how other developers start making games themselves. Not necessarily that they'll make them harder, but perhaps they'll allow players more agency and not hold their hands as much. It's not a perfect game, but there are no perfect games, and it's leaps and bounds ahead of so many of its contemporaries, and there are plenty of takeaways that I think a lot of competing devs should make a note of. This is the kind of game that is so gratifying that you can play it over and over again, and a lot of people already have. As for me, though, I think I've earned my rest for the time being. 'Cause now I'm gonna play Kirby.